For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio on Studio B, and I thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. I do want to speak about a few things, and I do relish these shows where I don't have any guests, and I'm actually able to cover some of the things that you are asking me about, the questions, the information that we've been bringing out, and to clarify a few things that many of you are still puzzled about and wondering about. Now, the reason I read the quote that I did this evening is to lay the foundation for what I'm going to be covering and talking about, and that will be the three different calendars as specified: the Enochian lunar and solar calendar, which are two completely separate things, and also the Qumran, the priestly calendar that is found there, which is also based on a 364-day solar um, a solar calendar, and the passing and the reckoning of the months according to the movement of the sun as it dances back and forth between the tropics of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. And so in this show, I'm also going to share some information from my ninth book, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch, because it's in that particular book that I break down the entirety of all the chapters that are found in the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries. And I explain all of those passages and the information contained within that portion of the book of Enoch, because the knowledge of how to interpret, how to decipher, how to decrypt the the motions attributed to both the sun and the moon and the other heavenly luminaries as described by Enoch in those chapters had been lost for at least the last 500 years. And I explained that in great detail. And so my work in bringing the truth of all of that again to new light for people, to help people to understand how to understand what Enoch is conveying for the motions of the heavenly luminaries as laid out in that particular section of the book, I consider to be very critical, because it's tied to exposing what is the counterfeit. Just as there will be an antichrist, a replacement, or instead of Christ, anti is instead of, that before the end of days and before the second advent, before the return of Christ. And we know that we're the fig tree generation. I cover all this in great detail within my books. But for a lot of people that are not well studied in the scriptures, in the prophecy, and with our being the final generation, the fig tree generation as laid out in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, and also the Apocalypse of Peter. I do cover this in many of my books: Lucifer, Father of Cain, on the fig tree generation, my ninth book, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. There's a chapter in the end, near the end, which is also on the fig tree generation, and the Revelation 12, the sign of the virgin clothed with the sun, child within her womb, and the moon beneath her feet, and wearing a crown of 12 stars. All of that is linked in connection to the blooming of the fig tree, as I expound upon in many of my different books. But you can also find under Endeavor Freedom on YouTube videos which expound upon this and explain who the two witnesses are, all the things that are connected to our being at the end of days, because the key to understanding that is in understanding what the fig tree is. And that, in my opinion, the fig tree was the recreation of the nation state of Israel, which occurred in 1947, according to the United Nations, the commandment that went forth November 29th, or to the actual founding May 14th, 1948, of, you know, Israel once more. But anyways, all that is tied to the blooming of the fig tree, and it was that sign that stood forth for the powers, the principalities, the rulers of darkness, Satan, as the eye at the top of the Illuminati pyramid. That when he saw Israel recreated as a nation state, he realized that this was the final generation and that we were at the end of days. And just as the demons, when they met Christ in body form, in flesh incarnation, they they recognized him as the Son of God. And they also said to him, have you come to torment us before the time? And so they know that there is a time when they the gig is up for them, and that they only have short time in order to perpetuate and to push forth the creation of the beast system, which is the New World Order system, the um, the beast kingdom, the seven horns, the 10 nation states. All of that is connected in similarity to the New World Order. But anyways, this evening I want to speak about a little bit and elaborate a little bit on the different calendar systems and what they are connected to, and how it is important for us to recognize the connections of both the sun and the moon to what are the signs and the seasons as established in Genesis chapter 1, but also in other passages which I will bring forth, in that you really, in order to keep track of the days, the seasons, the Moedim, um, the years, all of that, you have to really use both. You have to pay attention to both the sun and the moon, because they were both created in order for to mark the passing of time, and that it's not one or the other, but it is recognizing how both the lunar and the solar calendar, the Enochian lunar and the Enochian solar calendar, how they tie together in order to give us um, a way to calculate, because both of them work together as a giant clock, even with not just the sun and the moon, but also with that of the stars. There's a grand cycle which is even greater than the movements of the sun and the moon, and that is reflected in the movement of the sun as it recesses through the zodiac, that it will move 1 degree through the constellation systems as laid out in the zodiac, um, every 72 years. And it takes a grand cycle, what is called the the Great Year by E.W. Bullinger in the Witness of the Stars, it's a 25,000 year cycle. And that represents the sun moving through the 12 constellations of the zodiac, which our modern era, the 6,000 years of modern humanity and the last 6,000 years of history, we have gone through three of these signs: that the age of Taurus, um, the age of the twins, and now with Pisces moving into, we're in Pisces in the church age, and also with the age of Aquarius, that we are supposed to be entering or moving into the age of Aquarius at any time. Nobody knows exactly when that would happen or when that will unfold, uh, but we do know that it seems to be connected to the end of this age. And for those that don't know or have not looked into or examined, it's my opinion that we are at the end of what is the 6,000 years of the Second World Age, which in my opinion is represented by 120 jubilees. That if you take 120 jubilees times 50, that adds to 6,000 years, and then you have the 1,000 years of the millennial reign. And that 1,000 years um, is when Christ takes the judgment seat, and then every knee shall bow, every tongue confess, and those that are worthy will be allowed to enter into New Jerusalem and to go on and to reign with Christ over the course of that 1,000 years. And so I'm going to read and speak about that, but I want to start with Genesis 1 in order to establish what we're going to be talking about and why this is critical, because the fourth commandment in Exodus 20, we are to honor the Sabbath. And we are also in the second commandment to not take any other gods or to bow down before any other idols. And in observing and honoring a counterfeit calendar system and also observing counterfeit feast days, appointed times, holidays instead of holy days, um, that really we're involving ourselves in idolatry without realizing it, that we're caught up in paganism, and that part of that is the celebration, the observance, the honoring of things like Good Friday, Halloween, Christmas, Easter, these pagan holidays which have been created in order to unite the pagans and the Christians and to give them certain days by which to come together in congregation, celebration, and that a lot of these so-called holy days or holidays, they are pagan observances and they are rituals which are connected to, linked to, and established upon pagan fertility rites, sometimes very abominable celebrations where sacrifice, child or victim sacrifice often took place, or large um, drunken revelries and also sodomistic orgies and those kind of things. Um, the pagan festivals that were often connected to such rites, festivals, and celebrations, um, that's why we must be careful as to what we unite ourselves with, what we decide to connect ourselves with, and to observe in celebration. Because, in my opinion, those kind of things show us and include us in idolatry. And so that's why it's important, in my opinion, to study what are the ancient appointed Leviticus 23, those feast days, those festivals, and how and why they are important. Because, again, when you do look into them, study them, research them, you realize that they are also connected to and were fulfilled by Christ in his incarnation, in his flesh embodiment, in his first coming. And for those that are not disciples, or those that don't know Christ as Savior Messiah, when you do examine the prophecies associated with who he was and how even Adam knew when he was cast out of paradise, when he was kicked out of paradise and expelled, exiled here to the earth, he knew even then that Christ would come to save him and his descendants, and that he would redeem them and rectify the fall. But that, so many people do not understand this. And because of that, they don't accept him as Savior Messiah. And in my opinion, that's one of the most important revelations to understand, is that he truly was the incarnation of the Most High God, that he and the Father are one, and that he came in order to redeem us. And I know that, you know, for most of the world cares nothing about truth, has no concern for eternity or in such an inheritance, cares nothing about Christianity, the truth of the gospel, um, only wants to involve themselves in seeking out the pleasures, the entertainments, the vain distractions of this world. And that the reason that it is this way in this world is because, as Christ said, the kingdom, his is not of this world. That this world has been given over to the fallen angels, to the powers, the principalities, the rulers of darkness, wickedness in high places, and that they have established a grand matrix which asserts that materialism, pleasure, carnality, having fun, enjoying oneself, doing as thou wilt, that that is the point. That is the whole reason for our coming into flesh form. That we're to, not even to believe on judgment, or that there is any kind of penalty to our actions, or that there's any repercussions to our behaviors. They have most believing that they have evolved the monkeys, that there's all these multiple suns and planetary systems and different worlds out there, and that the universe is so large that we that there's no way that God could be narrowly focused on what is going on here. That the universe is just so broad and so expansive and so just infinite that God is too busy with creating these worlds to even be concerned with maintaining them. And that because of the expansive nature of the universe, that, you know, God's not even paying attention to what's going on here on the earth or with people, which is completely false. We are his narrow focus. We are his bride, the prodigal child. And he absolutely is concerned with each one of us. But again, the Antichrist, Satan, Lucifer, the fallen angels, the rebel angels, those that rebelled against him in establishing themselves as being like the Most High, they have counterfeited everything that they could and created a way of being, created a system of guiding, directing, and absorbing people into being led astray by their beliefs, by the things they want us to buy into, believe in. That much of what we are indoctrinated into, much of what we are taught, is nothing but lies built upon lies, built upon more lies. And that many of these lies have been established in order to lead us astray and to keep us disconnected from the glory of who we are and what we are really here to do. And this is why this truth, the remembrance of who we are, what all this is really about, why we are here, what is going on, all of that has been lost, forgotten. And that even the truth, so much of the truth, as contained within so many wisdom texts, have been condemned and labeled in such way that most people won't even read them or recognize in any way their value. That most of what God, the Lord God, has provided for the seekers, for the wisdom keepers, for those that are wanting to know and to understand what all of this is about, most of that has been hidden and condemned and labeled in such manner that most people won't ever look to them for clarity in helping one to understand what's going on in the world, or the strangeness of the situation that we are born into in being caught up in a fallen form, in a fallen state, and lost, born into a world, a prison planet, where we are surrounded by devils and demons. All of that is so very difficult to comprehend unless one has insight into what's really going on, what's really up. But again, most people, are not in any way concerned with those kind of things, which is why a lot of what I speak on and a lot of what I teach about um, is not well embraced by the majority. And I don't expect the majority to gravitate towards my teachings, because even the elect is but a few, is a very small minority. And this is why Christ said, "Speak I to them in parables, for they seeing see not, hearing hear not, neither do they understand." Hello, Stephanie. Good to see you, sister. And I am grateful for individuals like yourself, like you, Stephanie, and others, those of you that have reached out to me and have told me, the how much you appreciate the things that I'm doing, the truths that I'm sharing with you. That it really, for those of us that are in this line of work, that we really, really do appreciate all of you out there, because you make it worthwhile. And that if there was nobody to relate with and to share these teachings with, to speak on um, these kind of esoteric subjects, I mean, what would be the point? The reason we serve the kingdom is to see others benefit and be impacted, affected by the work that we do. And the truths that we have sought out so diligently and struggle to come to discernment upon. All right, we'll be right back, everyone.
Travesty. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 6 Eastern Time, Studio B.
All right, welcome back, everybody. And so I want to, in the last few portions of the show, I want to explain the calendars and the relevancy of studying the fullness of the book of Enoch, and how really it takes understanding how both the lunar and the solar calendar come together and work with one another to help us to keep and determine the Lord God's feast days and festivals. And so I'm going to start with Genesis, where it speaks about in Genesis 1, verse 14 through 16. I got to pull it up actually really quickly. But it's in this verse that it tells us that the sun and the moon were established for the determination of the Moedim, to keep track of the days, the seasons, the years, all of that. And so let me go here. In verse 14 it says, "And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." And so we see that it is both the sun and the moon which were established on the fourth day. They were placed into the firmament under the enclosed, the vaulted dome of the earth, that they were placed into the firmament over the earth on the fourth day, and that the earth was already established. The firmament was established on the second day, that the earth, in fact, had become destroyed without form and void, and that having become without form and void, it is reestablished after the war in heaven. And that this is what we see. On the second day, the firmament is put into place, and to encapsulate the earth, the circle of the earth, and that on the third day you have the dry land being separated from the sea level, and that it's on the fourth day that the luminaries were created and placed into the firmament, and that they were done so in order for seasons, days, and years. And actually, I'm going to pull up the Targum translation as well. Let me pull that up really quick, because I think the Targum it gives so much more greater detail on what the scriptures in the modern English translations say. And so this will add also when I read from here. And the other thing with regard to where we are on the lunar calendar, today is the fourth Sabbath, the lunar conjunction, the dark moon. It's the last Sabbath of the month of Nisan. And then tomorrow we'll have the 30th day of Nisan, which is called Translation Day. And then after that, we should have on the 28th of April, the sighting of the new moon. It should be the Kadesh of the second Hebrew month, which is called Ayar. All right. Let me go to the fourth day here. It says this in the Targum. And the Lord said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to distinguish between the day and the night, and let them be for signs and for festival times, and for the numbering by them the account of days, and for the sanctifying of the beginning of months and the beginning of years, and the passing away of months and the passing away of years, the revolutions of the sun, the birth of the moon, and the revolvings of the seasons. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for the sanctifying by them of the beginning of the months and years. That's from the Palestinian Targum. That in the version that I've translated, we have both the Aramaic and the Palestinian Targum together. It also says, and let them be for luminaries in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth, and it was so. And the Lord made two great luminaries, and they were equal in glory, 21 years, less 602 and 70 parts of an hour. And afterwards the moon recited against the sun a false report, and she was diminished, and the sun was appointed to be the greater light to rule the day, and the moon to be the interior light to rule in the night, and the stars. And the Lord ordained them unto their offices in the expanse of the heavens, to give forth light upon the earth, and to minister by day and by night, to distinguish between the light of the day and the darkness of the night. And the Lord beheld that it was good, and it was evening, and it was morning. Day 4. Okay. So you see how the Targum gives you a little bit more information, but I think it's relevant here in this verse that it says, and let them be for signs and for festival times, and for the numbering by them the account of days, and for the sanctifying and the beginning of the months and of the beginning of the years, the passing away of the months and the passing away of the years, the revolutions of the sun, the birth of the moon, and the revolvings of the seasons. Because really, both the sun and the moon, again, as I said, in the book of Enoch, we have a 364-day solar calendar described by Enoch, and he begins his description of the solar calendar when the sun is on the equator for the vernal equinox. That is the first day of spring. And then we have a 354-day lunar calendar, which is linked to the alternate 29 and 30-day lunar months, as determined by the establishment of what is the lunar calendar, which is based on the determination of Kadesh, which is new moon day. This day is excluded as the first day of the lunar month, and then you have 4 7-day sabbatical weeks. And so, because the moon has an average cycle of 29.531 days for it to go through all 4 of its phases, the lunar calendar alternates between 29 and 30-day months. Just as in the calendar that I created, the ancient Enochian lunar calendar, the month of Nisan has 30 days, this lunar cycle. It's not always that way. Sometimes the month of Nisan will have 29 days. But for this month, this year, this lunar cycle, if I'm correct, it should have 30 days. And then again, as I said, on the 28th of April, that will be Rosh Chodesh Iyar, the first of Iyar, which is the second month of the 6,000th year. Because again, it's my opinion, we're at the end of the 120th Jubilee, or right at the beginning of that Jubilee. But it's my opinion that we're at that 6,000th year. All right, so anyways, tonight is the 4th Sabbath, the lunar conjunctive Sabbath. It is also the 14th day of the counting of the Omer, the 29th day of Nisan, the first month of the year 6000. All right, so let me go back to what it says in Genesis 1, chapter 14, verse through 16. God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." That that word signs is the Hebrew word oth, and it means in the sense of appearing, a signal, literally or figuratively, as a flag, a beacon, a monument, an omen, prodigy, evidence, mark, miracle, a sign, or a token. That's what that word signs means. For seasons, the word for seasons is the word moedim, which are the appointed times. It means properly an appointment, a fixed time or season, specifically a festival, conventionally a year, by implication an assembly, as convened for a definite purpose. Technically, the congregation, by extension, the place of a meeting. Also, a signal as appointed beforehand, an appointed sign or time. So that's the word for seasons there in the Hebrew. The word for days is yom, and it is from an unused root meaning to be hot. A day as the warm hours, whether literal from sunrise to sunset or from one sunset to the next, or figuratively a space of time defined by an associated term, often use adverbs, age, always, chronicles, continually, daily, uh, day, elder, evening, everlasting, full life, um, even now, old, outlived, perpetually, presently, remaineth, required, season, on and on and on. So, anyways, you get the idea. Days. Now, the other word, years, the word for years is shane. It means a year as a revolution of time, a whole age, long, old, or yearly. And so you see that both the sun and the moon here in Genesis, they are for the signs of a day, a year, the seasons, and for signs, which in the Targum, that's festival times, the Moedim, the appointed times, which in my opinion are the Levitical feast days as laid out in Leviticus chapter 23. And so now we're going to see how this relates and why it is that we are supposed to look into and study both the lunar and the solar calendar, which I decided today. I haven't done it yet, but I will be at some point very soon creating an Enochian solar calendar, and that it should take me maybe a week or so. But I'm going to show and I'm going to convert the Gregorian to both the 364-day solar calendar as I have the 354-day lunar calendar. But it's still my opinion that Sabbath is dependent upon Kodesh, and that Kodesh meaning the time of the new moon, and that also the Levitical feast days are also dependent upon the the timing for Kadesh and the alignment of Sabbath according to the lunar calendar as laid out in the book of Enoch, which we'll go into more in the second hour. But I want to, before we get to break, hopefully we can cover this. First Chronicles chapter 23, verse 31, it says, and to offer all burnt offerings to the Lord on the Sabbaths, the new moons, and the fixed festivals, in the numbers set by the ordinance concerning them, continually before the Lord. And so we have mentioned here in First Chronicles that the festivals, the feast times, the appointed times unto the Lord, that they include the Sabbaths, the new moons, and the fixed festivals, and that the number is set by the ordinance concerning them, which again, this is Leviticus 23. And it's my opinion that as it says in the wisdom of Sirach, that it is the Kodesh, the moon, which marks the time for the seasons. And when you look in that verse, First Chronicles, where it says Sabbath, the word is Shabbat, and it means specifically the Sabbath. The word for the new moons there is Kadesh, and it means the new moon, by implication a month, the month or the new moon as established by Kadesh, the new moon. And so there's another verse too that is very important, and it is this Isaiah chapter 66, verse 22 and 23, which I read from at the very beginning of the show, which talks about after the heavens and the earth pass away, and that there is a new heaven and a new earth, which happens right before Christ comes to take his judgment seat, that the earth is purified in order for him to come and to be with us upon the earth for what will be the millennial reign. That is when the earth and the heavens and the earth are destroyed and recreated, and they are destroyed by fire, and the earth is purified and all evil is wiped away. and then Christ comes. You can find all of this in great detail in the Revelation of St. John, the theologian. Fascinating text. But anyways, it says here in verse 23, and it shall come to pass that from one new moon, which the word there is Kadesh, from one Kadesh to another Kadesh, and from one Shabbat to another Shabbat, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. And so at the end of days, once the earth is destroyed, recreated, and worship reestablished in what will be New Jerusalem, where it says that New Jerusalem will descend out from the heavens and come here to the earth, and that those that are righteous and that are worthy will be allowed to enter therein, that Christ will reign with us for 1,000 years, God willing, that we are numbered and counted among the elect, but that it is here on the earth that he is with us for that millennial reign. Now I'm going to go to the passage from the wisdom of Jesus, son of Sirach, chapter 43, which speaks about the moon. He says, he made the moon also to serve in her season for a declaration of times and a sign of the world. From the moon is the sign of feasts, a light that decreaseth in her perfection. The month is called after her name, increasingly wonderfully in her changing, being an instrument of the armies above, shining in the firmament of heaven, the beauty of heaven, the glory of the stars, an ornament giving light in the highest places of the Lord. At the commandment of the Holy One they will stand in their order, and never faint in their watches. Look upon the rainbow and praise him that made it very beautiful in the brightness thereof. It compassed the heaven about with a glorious circle, and the hands of the Most High have banded it, have bended it. And so we see here that um, even in, there's different translations of this particular text, but we see that the moon is the determiner of the festal times. Let me actually go to a different translation of that same passage. All right, we'll pick it up on the other side. We'll be right back, everyone.
Who knows what evil lurks in the halls of Washington? Well, that would be me, Wild Bill Samsel, your host of the Samsel Report. Join me for Wild Bill's Headline Roundup every Saturday night, right here on Revolution Radio.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I do want to quickly remind the listening audience that Revolution Radio is a listener-supported, commercial-free, and corporate-free truth network, and that we do have a certain amount of monthly bills, not a lot, but enough that we do have to do a certain amount of fundraising each month in order to meet those needs and to keep coming to you in the manner that we do, and that those of you that can afford to support Revolution Radio, even at the price of one meal in a month, that you can have and purchase access to the archives and download all of the shows from all of the various hosts there that are archived there freely, for your own listening enjoyment or to share with others. And that's just $4.95 a month. And so if you can, please do go to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, click on the donate button, and subscribe to the archives, or give what you can, and know that we greatly appreciate you and your support of the network. All right, continuing. The passage that I was speaking about, a different version, different translation, it says, "It is the moon that marks the changing seasons, governing the times, their everlasting sign. From the moon comes the sign for festal days, a light that wanes when it completes its course. The new moon, as its name suggests, renews itself. How marvelous it is in this change, a beacon to the hosts on high, shining in the vault of heaven, of the heavens." And as I have stated previously, it is the Kadesh, the new moon. Even the word Kadesh comes from the verb. It's the verb, a primitive root, Kadash, Chadash, Kadash. It means to be new, causatively to rebuild, renew, repair. And so that's the word Kadesh, which in the Strongs means the new moon, by implication, a month, monthly, or the new moon. And again, that word Kadash is what the root for the word Kadesh, and it means to be new, causatively to rebuild, to renew, to repair. And so, as I've shown, and as Philo, and also as Enoch, as we're about to go into, the moon is the determiner for the Sabbaths and the festal times, the appointed times, the Levitical feast days. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that um, disagree, and they believe that we should only follow the Enochian solar calendar. Now, and I am in agreement that it's important to understand how this calendar works, but that when you study and read the book of Enoch, especially the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries, as I decrypted in my 9th book, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch, that it describes both of these calendars. It describes a 364-day solar calendar and describes how the sun moves back and forth between the tropics of Capricorn and the tropics of Cancer to divide the year into 4 quarterly 91-day seasons, and that these 90-day seasons are divided by 4 special days, the equinoxes and the solstices. And that when the equinoxes or solstices occur, that those are the first days of those particular seasons. And so Enoch describes the movement of the sun beginning with its alignment directly above the equator, where it divides the night and the day into 12 equal hour proportions. And that this is the first day of spring. And then you have 90 days following the vernal equinox. You have 90 days. The month of Nisan, Iyar, and Siwan, that those are the months of spring. And then we go into, after that, on the longest day of the year, on the summer solstice, that we then enter into, and that occurs on the 21st of June this year at 12:24 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, that takes us into the month of Tammuz. And then, you have the 3 summer months, Tammuz, Av, and Elui, Elui. And then we return back to the to the autumnal equinox. And then once we reach the autumnal equinox, which occurs in September of this year, uh, then we reach the first day of fall. And then you have the month of Tishri, which also kicks off the fall feast, the Feast of Trumpets, and the Day of Atonement, and also um, the Feast of Tabernacles. I just recently learned today, as I was reading the Legends of the Jews, the second book, that the Day of Atonement, um, that it is connected to the the day that all of the 12, the brothers of Joseph, that having sold him into bondage, that they atoned for their sins, and that it is a memorial of Joseph forgiving his brothers for having done so, and for all of them coming together and crying together, and regarding the passing of that moment, um, to what was the forgiveness, and that we are to recognize the same thing in the Day of Atonement, that we are to fast and also to recognize our shortcomings and to release whatever keeps us from having closer relationship to our Heavenly Father, to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. At some point, I'll actually share that, but we have the month of Tishri and Cheshvan, and then we get to the month of Kislev, and then then we enter into the winter, and we have the month of Tevet, the month of um, Tibet, and the month of Shavat, the month of Shavat, and then the month of Adar, which make up the winter, the season of winter. And so let me go through this with the book of Enoch really quick, just to give you a better understanding, and then I'm going to explain how these two calendars work together, and then I'll elaborate on the Qumran, the calendar that was located and discovered at Qumran. And what people don't understand about that calendar, even yes, it is a 364-day solar calendar, as I just described, that it also is determined to begin on the vernal equinox. That is the first day, and also the first day of the month of Nisan or Abib, um, for the calendar. And then each one of it's a 364-day annual solar calendar. Each season is 91 days, or 90 days, which it takes the sun 30 days to go through each one of the gates of heaven as it's traversing from the equator to the Tropic of Cancer. And then once it reaches the Tropic of Cancer, that's the summer solstice, the first day of summer. And then it takes 3 months for it to return back to the equator. And that's the first day of fall, the autumnal equinox. And then it takes 3 more months, 30 days each, to get back to the Tropic of Capricorn. And that's the winter solstice. And then it reverses course and begins to move back towards the equator for the 3 months of winter. And then when it reaches the equator, that's the beginning of a new year. The vernal equinox is the beginning of another solar year. And this calendar is 364 days. And so the Qumran, the priestly calendar, as is described in many of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the snippets and the fragments of the different calendar scrolls which were found there, they are concerned with determining which of the priests they serve twice a year. And so there's 24 Levitical priests that are cited as serving over the course of a solar year. And the priestly calendar is preoccupied with determining who that person is from the Levitical priesthood, the family of the Levites. And so that's again, it's only one half of what is the fullness of the calendar system as described by Enoch. And I'll confirm this for you. All right. When you go to Enoch, chapter 71, that you'll see that the description, Enoch begins with the description of the movement of the sun, and he describes it the first month as it being directly on the equator, which the gate above the equator, between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer, are the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth gate. And so he describes it. He says in verse 71:9, in the same manner, it goes forth in the first month by the great gate. It goes forth through the fourth of those six gates, which are at the rising of the sun. And in the fourth gate, through which the sun with the moon proceeds, in the first part of it, there are 12 open windows from which issues out a flame when they are opened in their proper periods. When the sun rises in heaven, it goes forth through this fourth gate 30 days. And by the fourth gate in the west of heaven on a level with it descends. During that period, the day is lengthened from the day, and the night curtailed from the night for 30 days. And then the day is longer by 2 parts than the night, which is absolutely correct. Once it passes the equator for the vernal equinox, the days get longer and the nights grow shorter until it reaches summer solstice, then it reverses course. And this is exactly what Enoch describes in this portion of the text. I'll just read a few passages to give you this idea. The day is precisely 10 parts and the night is 8. When you divide what Enoch is describing, a 24-hour period, by 18 portions, each segment is valued at 1.333333 hours. And so you multiply 1.3 to the infinity times 10, and it gives you the proportion, and the night is 8 portions, so you divide 1.3333 onward by 8. And what it tells you is that Enoch divides this 24-hour duration by 10 units for day and 8 units for night. When you multiply that by the 1.333 hours, you get 13.333 hours of day and 10.6666 hours of the evening, which, you know, those numbers go on into infinity. But basically, you can just say like 13 and a third hours of day and 10 and 2/3 hours of night. And he gives you a different proportion of the day and the night for each of the different gates that the sun is going through. I'll give you one more example. Enoch 71 verse 15, it says, the sun goes forth through this fourth gate and sets in it and turns to the fifth gate during 30 days, after which it proceeds from and sets in the fifth gate. Then the day becomes lengthened by a second portion so that it is 11 parts, while the night becomes shortened and is only 7 parts. And so again, here, when you multiply that, you get 11 units for day and 7 units for night equals 14 and 2/3 hours of daylight and 9.13 hours of night. And so that's what the division of the night and the day is for this 30 day period. And I'll give you one more example. Here, the sun now returns to the east, entering into the sixth gate and rising and setting in the sixth gate 31 days on account of its signs. The reason it is 31 days long here is because the sun actually reaches the Tropic of Cancer for what is the summer solstice. And then it reverses course and the days begin to grow shorter. This is the longest day of the year, the summer solstice. At that period, the day is longer than the night, being twice as long as the night, and become 12 parts. But the night is shortened and becomes 6 parts. Then the sun rises up that the day may be shortened and the night lengthened. So he tells you that it reverses course. And so Enoch divides the duration of the day and the night, 12 units for day, which equals 15.9 hours of daylight, which is almost 16 hours of daylight. And then the night is only 7.9 hours long, or almost 8 hours. And so you can see that Enoch is correct that the day is twice as long as that of the night. And then the sun reaching the Tropic of Cancer, it reverses course. It begins to move down through the sixth, the fifth, and the fourth gate until it reaches the equator once more. And that is the autumnal equinox. Now I'm going to go ahead and skip to the description of where it merges the two calendar systems, and then Enoch describes and explains the lunar calendar. All right. You can find this in Enoch chapter 71, verse 43, where it begins to speak about the lesser luminary. He says, the lengthening of the day and the night and the contraction of the day and the night are made to differ from each other by the progress of the sun. By means of this progress, the day is daily lengthened and the night greatly shortened. This is the law and the progress of the sun. And it's turning when it turns back, turning during 60 days and going forth. This is the great everlasting luminary, that which he names the sun forever and ever. This is also that which goes forth, a great luminary, which is named after his peculiar kind, as God commanded. Now, when you get to chapter 72, this is the portion where it speaks about the inferior luminary. It begins to describe the motions of the moon and its particular cycle. It says, after this law I beheld another law of an inferior luminary, the name of which is the moon, and the orb of which as the orb of heaven. Its chariot, which it secretly ascends, the wind blows, and light is given to it by measure. Every month at its exit and entrance it becomes changed, and its periods are as the periods of the sun, and when in like manner its light is to exist, its light is a seventh portion from the light of the sun, meaning that the sun is 7 times brighter than that of the moon. Continuing, verse 72:4. Thus it rises, and at its commencement toward the east goes forth for 30 days. At that time it appears and becomes to you the beginning of the month. 30 days it is with the sun in the gate from which the sun goes forth. And so, of course, Enoch is describing here that the beginning of the month occurs with the appearance of the moon. That when you see the very first sliver, the sighting of the new moon, that is the beginning of the month. So you can see that Enoch is describing according that the beginning of the month is determined by the moon, which means that he is describing here now a lunar calendar. And so we're going to go into great detail on this once we return from the first break. But you can see that the first chapter 71 is describing the solar calendar, this 364-day quarterly, 91-day quarterly solar calendar. And now in the chapter 72 on the lesser luminary, we're going to be going into how the lunar calendar is determined. And these two work together, as Enoch will also describe. And so, again, it's important to understand how both work together. It's not one or the other, but it is in fact how the sun and the moon interact and interweave together to create the days, the months, the seasons, and the years. And then you add, Enoch also describes the celestial luminaries, the stars, and their great cycle, the movement of the zodiac. And this is also a portion of what is the heavenly clockwork system, that these stars and their movement, their procession through the different constellations, it describes what is referenced by E.W. Bullinger in his book, The Witness of the Stars, as the great year. And I'll try to get to that as well, because these are all pieces of what is the heavenly timepiece. They all represent portions of what is the clockwork of the creation, as established for us by the Most High God. And if you differentiate or you disinclude one or the other, or even the stars, you're missing a significant portion of what is the timekeeping mechanism of the movements of these celestial luminaries. All right, one more passage. Chapter 72, verse 6, it says, half of it is in extent 7 portions, 1/2, and the whole of the orb is void of light, except a 7th portion out of the 14th portions of its light. And in a day it receives the 7th portion, or half that portion, of its light. Its light is by sevenths, by 1 portion and by the half of a portion. It sets with the sun. All right, we'll be right back.
To put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop, and you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. Let me pick it up. All right, in this portion of the Book of Enoch, he's describing the lunar calendar. And the lunar calendar, as I said, is a 354-day calendar. He tells you how to determine the beginning of the moon, the new moon, or the new lunar month. And he tells you that it is that day, as I was reading in this before we went to break, it says, half of it is in extent 7 portions, 1/2, the whole of its orb is void of light, except a 7th portion out of the 14 portions of its light. So Enoch is telling you, when it is 1/14th portion full, which is 1/7 of the full moon, that it has exactly 0.7%, that it's 7% full, which is interesting because I, in making changes to the calendar, I was trying to line up with the first sliver, that the first sighting of the sliver of the uh, the the waxing crescent moon. And what I discovered is that Enoch is absolutely correct, that the new moon, the sighting of the new moon and the sliver, the Kadesh, that it doesn't become visible until it reaches that 1/7 portion full, or 7% full. That when I had changed the calendar, connecting it to uh, what I thought would be the first sliver, which was 3 to 4 to 5% um, as far as the new moon, that you couldn't actually see it. That it wasn't until the moon was reached on that day 7% full that it actually becomes visible. And so I had to recalibrate the the calendar once again, as determined and as spoken about by Enoch, because he tells you that, and in a day it receives a seventh portion, or half the portion of its light. Its light is by sevens, by one portion, and by the half of a portion it sets with the sun. So this is what it says, as I explain in my book. Every day when the moon rises with the sun, it gains 1/2 of a seventh portion of light. When one divides 14 into 1, that number amounts to 0.0714205 or a little over 7% of light a day. This proportion is the total sum of the light that the moon daily increases or decreases as it progresses through each of its quarterly phases, cycling as cited here from being completely void of light, which is the dark moon, the lunar conjunctive moon, to being halfway, which is the first quarter, to then all the way full, which is what Enoch is about to describe. And so let's pick it up there. And when the sun rises, this is chapter 72, verse 7. And when the sun rises, the moon rises with it, receiving half a portion of light. On that night, when it commences its period previous to the day of the month, the moon sets with the sun. Okay, the only time that the moon sets with the sun is when the moon is in conjunction, when it is the dark moon, when we can't actually see it. But then, on the day that it regresses, well, actually, I'll read it. Verse 72, verse 9, it says, chapter 72, verse 9. And on that night it is dark in its 14 portions, that is, in each half. But it rises on that day with 1/7 portion precisely, and in its progress declines from the rising of the sun. And so when it is in lunar conjunction, it's moving with the sun. It actually rises with the sun, moves across the sky with the sun, and sets with the sun. On the very next morning, it regresses just a slight bit so that you can actually see it, and you'll see the first sliver. And the first sliver of the moon, the waxing crescent, it will be 1/7 portion precisely, which is exactly when it becomes visible, as Enoch says. And that this is the beginning of the lunar calendar month. And then chapter 72, verse 10, it says, during the remainder of its periods, its light increases to 14 portions, meaning that it over 14 days, it becomes full. So for once it becomes visible at 1/7 portion, over the next 14 days, it will become full. And then once it becomes full, then it goes through what is the waning, through where it starts to lose its light, and it will lose its light in similar proportion, one half of a 14th portion, or 1/7 portion um, daily. All right, picking up chapter 73, it says, "Then I saw another progress and regulation which he effected in the law of the moon. The progress of the moons and everything relating to them, Uriel showed me, the holy angel who conducted them all. Their stations I wrote down as he showed them to me." All right, I'm going to skip just a little bit. Uh, "I wrote down their months as they occur and the appearance of their light until it is completed in 15 days. In each of its 2 7 portions, it completes all its light at rising and at setting." And so Enoch is just telling you that the moon cycles through, the waxing crescent till it becomes full, and then it goes through waning. It begins to lose its light. And the moon actually trails the sun by 12 degrees and 50 minutes every day. And so this, because it's a little bit slower than the sun, this is what causes the moon to go through its cycle from waxing crescent to full, from first quarter to full, and then from all the way to third quarter to lunar conjunctive moon. Now, in chapter 73, verse 5, Enoch describes both of these cycles, the sun and the moon, as they intertwine together. I'm not going to read that. I'm going to actually skip down. You can read that for yourself, 73:5 through 73:9. And then Enoch describes, once we get to chapters 73:10 and 73:11, he describes how the two calendars come together and how the lunar calendar will be 10 days short, because the lunar calendar is 354 days long, whereas the solar calendar is 364 days long. So I'll read that. 73:10. "Thus I beheld their stations as according to the fixed order of the months the sun rises and sets," in verse 11. "At those times there is an excess of 30 days belonging to the sun in 5 years. All the days belonging to each year of the 5 years when completed amount to the 364 days, and to the sun and the stars belong 6 days, 6 days in each of the 5 years, thus 30 days belonging to them." Now that's if you don't include the solstices and the equinoxes, as I explain here. So verse 73:12, he says, "So that the moon has 30 days less than the sun and the stars." All right, this is my explanation of that, as you can find in my Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. "The moon's monthly cycle, 29.531 days, is shorter than that of the sun's, 30 days as it cycles through the 6 gates of heaven, making the lunar year over 12 months of alternating between 29 and 30-day periods, add up to a total of 6 times 29 plus 6 times 30, which equals 354 days. Since it takes the sun 30 days each to course back and forth through the 6 gates of heaven, the 12 months of the solar cycle add up to 12 times 30, which equals 360 days. Subtracting the 360 days which correlate to the sun's motion through these gates from the 354 days which correspond to the moon's motion through these gates equals the 6 days a year, or 30 days over 5 years, that Enoch cites as belonging only to the sun and the stars. In chapter 73, verse 13, he says this: "The moon brings on all the years exactly, that their stations may come neither too forward nor too backwards a single day, but that the years may be changed with correct precision in 364 days. In 3 years, the days are 1,092. In 5 years, they are 1,820. And in 8 years, 2,912 days. I explained this as well. It says, if one divides the totals given for the amount of days that correspond to the length of these years, the math in every instance equals 364, which is the total number of days in a solar year according to Enoch's account. 3 years equals 1,092 days, divided by 3 equals 364. 5 years, 1,820 days, which again, divided by 364 is 5. 8 years, 2,912 days. Divide that by 364 and you get 8. And so Enoch is speaking here about the difference between the solar year, according to his description of the motions of the sun, and the lunar year, which corresponds to God's calendar as determined by the synodic month and the 4 phases of the moon. In verse 14, chapter 73, he says, to the moon alone belong in 3 years 1,062 days. In 5 years it has 50 days less than the sun, for an addition being made to the 1,062 days. In 5 years there are 1,770 days, and the days of the moon in 8 years are 2,832 days. If one divides the totals given for number of days and the length of the years, in every instance the sum equals 354, which again is the total number of days of the lunar calendar. When one divides 354 by 12 as the number of lunar months on God's calendar, one gets 29.5, which coincides approximately with the 29.530588 days of a synodic month. The ancient Hebrew calendar system maintains alignment with this average by alternating the 12 lunar months by 29 and 30-day durations. 1,062 divided by 3 equals 354. 1,770 divided by 5 equals 354. 2,832 divided by 6 equals 354. 364 as total number for the days of the solar year minus 354 as the total number of days of the lunar year equals the 10 days which multiplied by 5 equals the 50 days and 5 years that differentiate the lunar and the solar year according to Enoch's descriptions. And so you can see how Enoch is describing both the lunar and the solar calendar. 364-day solar calendar, 354-day lunar calendar. All right, which is why it says in chapter 73, verse 15, for its days in 8 years are less than those of the sun by 80 days. That's 10 days. Remember, 364 minus 354 equals 10 days. So in 8 years, you get 80 days, which is the diminution of the lunar calendar from that of the solar. All right, if one subtracts the number of days in a solar year, 364, from the number of days in a corresponding lunar year, 354, one will find that the lunar year has exactly 10 fewer days than the solar year. In 8 years, that diminution totals 80 days, as explained in 73, verse 15. The year then becomes truly complete according to the station of the moon and the station of the sun, which rise in the different gates, which rise and set in them for 30 days. Again, here Enoch is describing at the end of chapter 73 how he is giving you both a lunar and a solar calendar. Now, this next portion, chapter 74, is describing the celestial, the zodiac, and the constellations, and how they also are part of a grand, a cycle, a different time-keeping mechanism of the celestial luminaries, the heavenly luminaries, the clockwork of the heavens. It says this. Enoch chapter 74, verse 1. These are the leaders of the chiefs of the thousands, those who preside over all creation and over all the stars, with the 4 days which are added and never separated from the place allotted them according to the complete calculation of the year. And these serve 4 days which are not calculated in the calculation of the year. Remember, I told you that those 4 days are the solstices and the equinoxes. When you add those to the 360 days of the, you know, 30 days times 12, 360 days, plus the equinoxes and the solstices, you get 364 days solar years. All right, continuing. Verse 74:3. Respecting them, men greatly err, for these luminaries truly serve in the dwelling place of the world. 1 day in the first gate, 1 in the third gate, 1 in the fourth gate, and 1 in the sixth gate. As I described, these are the equinoxes and the solstices because they occur. The winter solstice occurs when the sun is in the first gate. When it is on the third gate and the fourth gate, those are the equinoxes, the vernal equinox on the fourth gate and the autumnal equinox when it's on the third gate. And then when the sun is on the Tropic of Cancer, which is the sixth gate, that is the longest day of the year. And so that's where the equinoxes and the solstices tie together with those 4 gates as mentioned there. And the harmony of the world becomes complete every 364 state of it, for the signs, the seasons, the years, and the days. Uriel showed me the angel whom the Lord, glory of glory, appointed over all the luminaries. And so you can see that Enoch is describing the sun and the moon, and now we go into the stars. Of heaven and in the world, and they might rule in the face of the sky, appearing over the earth, become conductors of the days and the nights, the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the ministers of heaven, which make their circuit with all the chariots of the heavens. Thus Uriel showed me 12 gates open for the circuit of the chariots of the sun in heaven, from which the rays of the sun shoot forth. From these proceed heat over the earth. When they are open in their stated seasons, they are for the winds and for the spirit of the dew. When in their seasons they are open in the heaven at the extremities. 12 gates I beheld in heaven and the extremities of the earth, through which the sun, moon, and stars, and all the works of the heaven proceed at their rising and setting. Many windows also are open on the right and on the left. One window at a certain season grows extremely hot. So also are there gates from which the stars go forth, as they are commanded, and in which they set according to their number. I saw likewise the chariots of heaven running the world above to those gates, in which the stars turn, which never set. One of these is greater than all, which goes round the whole world. All right, now he talks about the zodiac. And I'm going to read a passage from E.W. Bullinger. He says this about the zodiac, the great year. Besides these monthly differences between the motion of the sun and that of the stars, there is also an annual difference. For at the end of the 12 months, the sun does not come back to exactly the same point in the sign which commenced the year, but is a little behind it. But this difference, though it occurs every year, is so small that it will take 25,579 years for the sun to complete this vast cycle, which is called the precession of the equinoxes, about 1 degree in every 71 years. If the sun came back to the precise point at which it began the year, each sign would correspond always and regularly exactly with a particular month. But owing to the constant regression, the sun, while it goes through the whole 12 signs every year, commences the year in one sign for only 2,131 years. In point of fact, since the creation, the commencement of the year has changed to the extent of nearly 3 of the signs. And so, as I said, in the modern creation of humanity, we have gone through 3 of those signs, which equals to about the 6,000 years. The signs are Aries, Taurus, and Pisces, and supposedly we're supposed to be moving into the Aquarian age, anytime now, but nobody really knows. we're at the end of the show. I hope I was able to explain how these three cycles, both the sun, the moon, and the stars, come together as a giant clockwork, and that all three of them are significant for understanding the counting of the days, the months, the seasons, and the years. For the sun, one cycle, the 24-hour day, is where we get one day. And 30 of those days equal 1 month on the solar year. The lunar calendar is a little bit different, but both the sun, the moon, and the stars have their own grand cycle, and they help us to determine the passing of time and to keep up with the signs and the seasons and to recognize where we are with regard to the passing of the years. God bless all. Good night.